In the old days, when a family needed a new barn, everyone from miles around would get together and have what they call a barn raising. Duggar's moving plan is something like that, in reverse.
Okay, we don't want to forget anybody.
We dress everyone in red so that we can keep up with everyone. When we go on a trip, we have to, get out and move around. We don't want to lose anyone. And this way, we can quickly spot all of our group.
Hey everyone, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. It is Thursday, February 23rd, 2023, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. So it was 2 days ago that I did a video. I uploaded a video about a former friend of Michelle Duggar reaching out to me to provide some backstory about their interactions with Michelle during the time that everything was going down with Josh Duggar. And they described a very frantic Michelle calling and asking them to come over and giving them this very long backstory about Josh and everything that was going on with the family at the time. This also coincided with the family being offered a show by TLC after a variety of different episodes or documentaries of sorts that were shown of the family on the Discovery Network. So after that video, I got another email from that same person, and then I got a separate message from a former friend of Jim Bob's. So there's a lot of people that are kind of coming out of the woodwork, and I got even more backstory about the time frame in question of when Josh Duggar's head got shaved and really what happened in that time period, what Jim Bob was telling people, which is kind of contradictory to what Michelle told the friend. And the stories changed, shifted, and then I also got some more backstory about Anna Duggar and her father and how that whole marriage came to pass because of the Duggars needing someone to watch Josh so they could just go be famous. So this video, I want to talk to you about Josh Duggar's hair getting shaved because they believed he was prideful and vain with his appearance and that shaving his head would help him with his pride, and then sent him to a friend's house to dig out a pond and stuck him basically in a camper alone by himself, isolated, and everything after that. And then I'm going to also talk with you about what happened once Anna's parents got involved and what they knew and what they thought they were going to be able to do and why they believed they could fix Josh. So this is going to be a little bit more extensive than the information that I've provided thus far because I honestly didn't even know of this until a couple days ago. So before we dive into this topic, can you please do me a favor and give this video a thumbs up? Also, subscribe to my channel if you've not yet subscribed by clicking on the subscribe button below. Make sure to click on the bell so that you can get notified. Make sure to set the notifications for all so you never miss a video. Leave a comment if you have something to say, and share this video with your friends. So 2 days ago, I shared with you that it was 2006 when Michelle Duggar made a frantic call to a friend. Well, the same friend reached out and said, there was this period where Josh had to get his head shaved, and there was some sort of discipline that took place, and you might want to ask around about that because my understanding is that it's not exactly the way it's been described online. So several years ago, there was this podcast that came out and they said that there was a head shaving event. And then there was this article on Radar Online where someone from the church came forward and said that Josh had his head shaved in front of the entire church. So once that person contacted me, then I spoke to another friend of Jim Bob's and I asked them about the head shaving incident. So this person was around the Duggar family during the entirety of this entire situation and was involved in a lot of the conversations of how to handle things, what to do. Jim Bob went to a lot of his friends for a lot of advice, and there was a lot of disagreements. But what they told me was that the timeline was that there was the 2002 through 2003 incidents. Josh had been sent away to the Little Rock training center where he worked under this guy named Harold, and he did like hard labor and Bible studies. And it was with the IBLP, and Bill Gothard basically took credit for fixing Josh and claimed that he became a Christian. Well, it was after this period that in 2004 and 2005, Josh had been apparently down in Little Rock again, but this time he was with the Holt family. So during this period, and if you remember, Bobby Holt testified in court that Josh had been staying in Little Rock and that he would come over sometimes while Jim Holt, her husband, was in the legislative session. Josh was part of the campaign that helped. He worked on Jim Holt's campaign, and he was doing a lot of, like, I think the digital side of things. And during this campaign, he was caught using his computer looking at content of the adult type that is inappropriate. Josh at the time was only 16, I was told. So once he's caught doing this, there's this huge like understanding like, okay, he hasn't changed. So he goes and he's sent away to be at Little Rock with Gothard and all of those people. They claim they fix him. He goes down to be with the Holts, and he helps on Jim Holt's campaign, and then he's caught online looking at adult content. Mind you, it wasn't like the kind of content that he's in jail for today. So it's at this point that they think that he still has a problem and he's in need of fixing. So instead of sending him away, they all meet, and this is what they told me. So they meet as a church to discuss what Josh has done. And the decision is made by a group that Josh needs to have his head shaved. And the head shave was a decision made by them that he had so much pride, that he was a prideful young man that took way too much like pleasure in his physical appearance. He believed he was, very good looking, and he was very proud of his hair. And they felt that if they shaved his head, that he would gain some humility. And then after he had his head shaved, they would send him to a friend's house where he would dig out his pond. So the friend apparently offers to have Josh come and stay at his property. Now, this guy had 2 young children at the time, but Josh did not live in the house with the kids. Instead, the guy who really was just a guy from church, Josh was living in a camper. And I think the way that they described it on a podcast, a friend of Josh's from growing up said that he lived in a shed. My source said that he was staying in a camper on the property, and that from time to time, the guy would come out and talk with Josh and sort of like counsel him through the Bible. And it was there that Josh told that guy that he became a Christian. Okay. So Josh tells the guy, Harold, tells Harold in Little Rock at the IBLP that he became a Christian because of him. And then he goes and spends time at the property of the family's friend, digging out a ditch all day, and becomes a Christian there after having Bible counseling with this friend who literally just needed help digging out a ditch. So I asked the guy, and I said, why would you guys make the decision to have him go dig out a ditch? And this person wasn't necessarily didn't have a say in what Josh did because he wasn't a parent, but he said that the belief was that if Josh was busy enough, he wouldn't have time to think about other things. And if they put him to work, he wouldn't have the time or the energy or the desire to get in trouble. And if they could just get him closer to God, then he would fix himself, because they believed that being a Christian would fix his problems. So obviously, he goes there, he's gone, and I said, how long was he there for? And they said, I think he was there for like 6 weeks to 2 months. And I said, okay. So that's 2004, 2005. And it's around that same time, again, that Bobby testified in court that about Josh being with them in Little Rock. And it's also the same time she says that Josh confesses to her about what he did to Joy, the youngest sister. So when I asked about the head shaving, the biggest misnomer was, or the biggest rumor was that Josh was made to stand up in front of the church and apologize. And so the woman I talked to said that she doesn't recall Josh ever standing in front of the church and apologizing ever. But she did say that she wasn't there really early on. So I asked the friend and I said, was the head shaving in front of everyone? They said no. And I said, okay. So I said, well, who would have shaved the head? And they said, probably one of the sisters, because apparently the sisters were in charge of shaving heads and doing all the hair cutting. And he said that Jessa was the family hair cutter. So it was likely that Jessa shaved the head and then sent him off to work. Now, in the first 14 kids, raising 14 children, or whatever the first episode was, 14 children and pregnant again, at the very end of the episode, Josh had his head shaved. And the friend said that they would actually have to go get Josh, who was at the friend's house, digging out the pond, and bring him home and pretend like everything was fine. And then he would come to film for a few hours, and then they would send him back to the friend's house to go dig out the pond. And he was basically isolated in a camper by himself for a couple months. Clearly, the physical labor obviously did not work. No help was provided to this kid, never sought counseling. They never sought anyone to help him. As I told you in the previous video, that in 2006, Michelle had told her friend that the reason why Josh was the way he was is because when he was 8 years old, that he developed, or he found a box of men's magazines, and that was why he did what he did. Well, Michelle's story didn't match what Jim Bob's story was. So once Jim Bob started talking to his friends, this friend said to me that Jim Bob said that he actually started blaming Michelle. So he told a bunch of the people at church that Michelle was promiscuous in high school, and that because she was promiscuous in high school, and because she would sometimes self-please herself, and I'm going to be very PC by saying that, but because she self-pleased herself, Josh inherited her tendencies. So the IBLP has this really big thing about inheriting like the sins of your father. So in this belief system, they believe that the sin of your father, whether it's promiscuity, problems with lust, problems with drinking, problems with whatever, it takes like X amount of generations of no one doing it before it can be completely out of the system and you won't inherit the problem. So he was saying that Michelle's sin and problems with premarital promiscuity and pleasuring herself in her teen years was the reason for why Josh did what he did to his sisters. He also at one point said that he became like his father or inherited things from his father, but he wouldn't specify what his father did. So Jim Bob would basically point the finger to anyone else. So it's the books, Michelle first says it's the magazines. Then it's Michelle is promiscuous and likes to please herself. Then it's he inherited the sins of my father from Jim Bob. But Jim Bob would tell friends that he had never struggled ever once a day in his life with being impure. He had never struggled with thoughts of lust, and he had never self-pleased himself in his entire life. And so therefore, Josh certainly could not inherit the problem from him. So it wasn't anyone else's fault. It wasn't his fault. It was everyone else's fault. In the meantime, no one was asking if something happened to Josh. So the friend of Michelle's said to me, she's like, they kept pointing the finger at all these external circumstances, but I can't help but think that something actually happened to Josh that caused this to happen. And nobody would talk about it. And because no one could ask, no one would talk about it, and Josh never got help for it. They said, I just wonder how things could have been different had they actually gone that route and talked to Josh about if something happened to him and what it could have been. Because there was a lot of blame shifting and pointing fingers by Jim Bob. And the friend of his basically said it's standard Jim Bob to blame everyone for everything but himself. So despite everything that was going on with Josh during this time, the Duggars wanted to be famous and they wanted a way out of poverty. And they had a lot of kids and they were living in a small house. They couldn't finish their home. They didn't have the money to finish their home. They didn't have the money to finish and furnish their new home. And TLC was giving them and providing them a way to have a more lucrative lifestyle, be able to feed their kids, and do more things for their kids. Like another thing they said was like all of those trips to the grocery store was just for the show, and Michelle would already have a full pantry and they would go shopping again. And either way, it provided Jim Bob a way to provide for his family, and he wanted to be famous. And the family had been looking for ways to be famous for quite some time before TLC took the show. But what people disagreed about was that they were being investigated by the police while filming was going on, and they were going to be doing a show in the middle of all of that, knowing that the girls were going through a lot and that Josh was still a problem. So once they get the show, then Josh becomes even more of a liability. So they need to find a way to hand him off to someone else. So in comes Michael Keller, who they meet through the IBLP because he has been in the IBLP forever. And Jim Bob finds out that Michael has a prison ministry, and he goes to prisons and speaks to incarcerated young men, and he helps reform them. And through Michael Keller and his relationship, they hook up Anna and Josh and decide to get them married. And they tell them high level about what Josh has done. And they don't seem to think it's going to be that much of a problem. And if it is, that Michael will be able to fix him. So they thought that getting him married would fix his problems, and that if he did stumble or have issues, that Michael Keller, because of his background, would be able to bring Josh back to God. So the Duggars were trying to find a million different ways to get rid of Josh. So when he first does the things to the girls, he's sent to Little Rock. Then he's sent to dig ditches. Then he's sent to Little Rock again. And then once he becomes even more of a liability for the show, then they get him married. It's kind of sad when you hear about it in that respect, because in the middle of all of this, there's a kid at the time who had a problem that needed help and didn't get it, and no one helped him. And the people that were around him offering advice and solutions were misguided and not trusting the right people and believing that they could handle things on their own, which they couldn't. And not ever helping him didn't help him. It actually made him worse. And he never had any sort of reasonable levels of accountability. And Jim Bob and Michelle just couldn't be bothered to deal with it because they wanted to be famous. And that's what I was told by multiple people. So the head shaving incident was not a public display in front of the church. It was not a public where he had to apologize to everyone. It was a private situation, decided to free Josh of his pride. And as far as some of the people involved still wanting to believe in Josh's innocence, it's because some of those same people believed they cured Josh. And so by believing that he's guilty would mean that they would have to accept the fact that he wasn't cured when they thought he was cured, and that their attempts to fix him didn't work. And then they would have to deal with the guilt of being a part of the problem. And that's hard for people to accept. That's what multiple people told me. So this is a problem. Men thinking they can fix people through God when Josh just needed help. And now he's too far gone. And now there's 7 kids. He's in prison, and Anna won't divorce him. And that was another thing. The friend of Michelle's, who's a devout Christian, said, I just wish they would let Anna divorce Josh. There's no reason for her to be staying around. To that I say, I agree. Tell me what your thoughts are in the comments below. Bye, guys.